The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, sealed with a wax stamp shaped like a family crest Naledi didn't recognize yet, but would never forget. "For you," the older woman said, sliding it across the private lounge table with 2 manicured fingers, like she was handling something faintly unpleasant. "Open it. Read it carefully. And then, make the intelligent decision I know you're capable of making." Naledi Dlamini looked at the envelope, then at the woman sitting across from her, Han Seo-yeon, mother of the man Naledi had been in love with for the past year and a half. Mother of the man who was, at this very moment, 3 floors above them in a packed ballroom, delivering a keynote address to 400 of Korea's most powerful investors. "Mrs. Han," Naledi said carefully, "I don't understand." "I think you understand perfectly," Seo-yeon said, her smile thin and practiced. "You're an intelligent woman. That's precisely the problem. An intelligent woman would already know how this ends." Naledi didn't move to open the envelope. She didn't need to. She'd heard enough whispered comments at enough company events over the past 18 months, the sideways glances, the pointed silences when she walked into a room on Daehyun's arm, the reporters who accidentally always cropped her out of photos where she stood beside him to know exactly what kind of number was waiting inside that cream-colored paper. "How much am I worth to you, Mrs. Han?" Naledi asked quietly. "Just so I understand the value you've placed on ending my relationship." Something flickered across Seo-yeon's face, not shame, Naledi noted, just mild surprise that the question had been asked so plainly. "Enough," Seo-yeon said, "that you'll never have to worry about money again. Enough that you could start a new life somewhere far from Seoul, somewhere no one would ever connect you to my son, and want for absolutely nothing." She folded her hands. "This isn't cruelty, Naledi. This is mathematics. My son is set to take over a company worth 11 trillion won in 18 months. The board, the investors, the entire Han family legacy, none of it survives a scandal about the heir's foreign girlfriend. I am simply the one brave enough to say what everyone else is already thinking." Naledi felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest, but her face, trained by years of learning exactly this kind of composure, gave nothing away. "And if I say no?" she asked. "If I take this to Daehyun right now, upstairs, in front of everyone, then you'll humiliate him at the most important speech of his career," Seo-yeon said simply. "And I'll simply try again next month. And the month after that, until you finally understand there's no version of this story where you win. I have resources you cannot imagine, Naledi. I have patience you don't want to test." Naledi looked down at the envelope one final time. Then, slowly, deliberately, she picked it up. Seo-yeon's carefully composed face allowed itself, just for a moment, the smallest flicker of triumph. "A wise choice," she said, rising from her chair, smoothing the front of her cream hanbok-inspired dress. "I'll have my assistant arrange the details. A clean exit, no press. No, I didn't say I was taking it for the reason you think," Naledi said quietly, still seated, the envelope now resting in her lap. "I said I was picking it up." Seo-yeon paused, one hand still on the back of her chair. "Excuse me?" Naledi looked up at her, and for the first time since sitting down, allowed her own composure to shift into something sharper, steadier, unmistakably calm. "There's a live press feed running upstairs right now," Naledi said. "Financial Korea Network, covering the gala for their evening broadcast. Cameras in the main hall. Reporters expecting exactly the kind of predictable, polished coverage your family always gives them." She stood, smoothing the front of her emerald gown, the envelope held loosely between 2 fingers. "I think it's time they got something a little more interesting." Seo-yeon's confident expression faltered, just slightly, uncertainty creeping in at the edges. "Naledi, think very carefully about what you're about to do." "Oh, I have," Naledi said, already walking toward the lounge door, toward the elevator, toward 400 investors and a room full of live cameras 3 floors above them. "I've thought about it for exactly the 18 months your family has spent pretending I don't exist." Behind her, she heard Seo-yeon's heels clicking rapidly to catch up. Heard the older woman's voice sharpen from composed threat into something closer to genuine panic. "Naledi, wait, this is not what but Naledi was already stepping into the elevator. the envelope still in her hand, the doors sliding shut on Seo Yeon's stunned, furious face, leaving Naledi alone with her own reflection in the polished elevator wall and 11 floors of rising silence to decide exactly what she was about to say. Live. In front of every camera in that ballroom, before we go any further, I want to know where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. And I love seeing how far this community reaches. And if you're the kind of person who can't sleep until they know how this ends, hit subscribe right now. Because trust me, what happens in that ballroom is going to change everything. Okay, let's go back upstairs with her. The elevator doors opened onto a wall of sound, champagne glasses clinking, a low murmur of conversation in 3 languages, and Kang Do-hyun's voice, amplified and steady, still mid-speech at the podium at the far end of the ballroom. And it is with that vision, Dae-hyun was saying, that Han Industries enters its next chapter, built not on the legacy we inherited, but on the future we choose to build. Naledi stood at the edge of the room for a moment, unnoticed, watching him. He looked exactly like the man 400 investors expected him to be: composed, precise, the picture of inherited excellence. He didn't yet know his mother had spent the last 15 minutes trying to buy his girlfriend's disappearance 3 floors below him. She scanned the room quickly. Financial Korea Network's camera crew stood near the left side of the stage. A young reporter named Yoona Choi, adjusting her earpiece, waiting for Dae-hyun's speech to conclude before cutting to her scheduled live segment. Naledi had met Yoona once before, briefly, at another event, a sharp, ambitious woman who'd always seemed slightly more curious about Naledi than the standard press coverage usually allowed. Naledi began moving toward her, weaving carefully through clusters of guests in tailored suits and designer gowns, the envelope still held loosely in one hand. She was 3 tables away when Seo Yeon caught up to her, gripping her arm with surprising strength for a woman in her 60s. Naledi, stop this. Right now. Seo Yeon's voice was a hushed, furious whisper, her composed public mask cracking at the edges. Whatever you're planning, I promise you, it will hurt you far more than it hurts my family. You made a mistake tonight, Mrs. Han. Naledi said quietly, not stopping, forcing Seo Yeon to keep pace beside her. You assumed I'd either take the money quietly or make a scene that would embarrass myself. You never considered I might do neither. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Seo Yeon hissed. The Han family has survived scandals that would have destroyed weaker names. We will survive this too. But you, a foreign girlfriend with no family connections, no protection, no one in this room who will stand beside you once the cameras turn you, will not survive what happens after tonight. Naledi stopped walking, turning to face her directly, close enough now that only the 2 of them could hear. I've survived worse than a disapproving mother-in-law, she said evenly. I grew up in a township outside Johannesburg where surviving was the only thing anyone taught you how to do well. I built a career in international finance in a country where half the boardrooms I walk into assume I'm someone's assistant before they assume I belong there. I have been underestimated by people far more dangerous than you, Mrs. Han, and every single one of them was wrong. Something in Seo Yeon's face shifted, not quite fear, but a recalibration. The particular unease of someone realizing their opponent was not who they'd assumed. This is your last chance, Seo Yeon said. Quieter now. Walk away, take the money, disappear quietly, and I promise you, no one will ever know this conversation happened. I don't want your money, Mrs. Han, Naledi said. I never did. I just wanted you to say it to my face, so I'd know exactly what I was dealing with. She held up the envelope. And now I think everyone else should know too. She turned and continued toward Yoona Choi, leaving Seo Yeon standing frozen among the crowd, her carefully constructed composure finally, visibly cracking. On stage, Dae-hyun was wrapping up his closing remarks, the room beginning to shift toward applause. Naledi reached Yoona just as the reporter's producers signaled 30 seconds to their live cutaway. Miss Choi, Naledi said quietly. My name is Naledi Dlamini. I believe your viewers might be interested in a story more interesting than the one you were planning to cover tonight. Yuna's eyes flicked briefly toward the stage, toward Daehyun, toward the envelope in Naledi's hand, quick calculation moving behind her expression. "You're his girlfriend," she said. "The one they never photographed properly." "I am," Naledi said. "And I have something to say, if you're willing to let me say it." Yuna studied her for exactly 2 seconds, the kind of instinctive, career-defining calculation good journalists learn to make fast. "We go live in 15 seconds, Yuna said, already gesturing to her cameraman. "Stand here. Don't look at the teleprompter, look at me." "And Miss Dlamini," she paused, adjusting her earpiece one final time, "whatever you're about to say, I hope it's worth what it's about to cost you." "It is," Naledi said quietly. The red light on the camera blinked on. "This is Yuna Choi, live from the Han Industries annual gala, where I'm joined by an unexpected guest," Yuna said smoothly into the camera, her professional composure sliding perfectly into place. "Miss Dlamini, thank you for joining us." "Thank you for having me," Naledi said, her voice steady despite the sudden, overwhelming awareness of 400 faces beginning to turn toward the small cluster of lights and cameras at the edge of the room. Across the ballroom, Naledi saw the exact moment Daehyun noticed her, his eyes finding her face through the crowd, confusion crossing his features as he registered the cameras, the envelope in her hand. His mother's stricken expression frozen near the back of the room. He started moving toward her, too far away to reach her before the interview began. "Miss Dlamini," Yuna continued, "you're holding an envelope. Can you tell our viewers what's inside it?" Naledi looked directly into the camera lens, 400 trillion won worth of investors and Korea's entire financial press watching live, and felt, for the first time all evening, completely and utterly calm. "I can," she said. "It's an offer from Han Seo-yeon to pay me to disappear from her son's life before he becomes CEO of this company." She held the envelope up slightly, letting the camera catch it clearly. "I'd like to give it back to her. Right now. In front of everyone." The ballroom went, for one suspended second, completely silent. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the ballroom erupted into a low, electric murmur, 400 guests turning in near unison toward the small cluster of cameras and lights at the edge of the room. "That's a significant claim, Miss Dlamini," Yuna said carefully, her journalist instincts visibly warring with genuine shock. "Can you elaborate? Where is Mrs. Han right now?" Naledi didn't need to answer. Seo-yeon was already pushing through the crowd toward them, her composure entirely abandoned now, her face flushed with a fury she could no longer hide. "Turn that camera off," Seo-yeon said, arriving breathless at the edge of the small press setup, her voice pitched somewhere between command and plea. "This is a private matter. This young woman is clearly confused, overwhelmed by "Am I confused, Mrs. Han?" Naledi asked calmly, turning toward her, still holding the envelope steady. "Or would you like to explain to Miss Choi's viewers exactly what you said to me 15 minutes ago, 3 floors below this ballroom?" Seo-yeon's mouth opened, then closed. For a woman who had spent 4 decades mastering the art of controlled public composure, she found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, with absolutely nothing prepared to say. The crowd had fully turned now, phones raised, several guests already live-streaming the moment on their own accounts, the kind of viral collision no PR team could contain once it started. "Naledi," Daehyun's voice cut through the murmur, closer now, breathless, having pushed through the crowd faster than anyone expected a company heir to move in a tailored tuxedo. He arrived at her side, his eyes moving rapidly between her face, his mother's stricken expression, and the envelope still held steady in Naledi's hand. "What is happening right now? Ask your mother," Naledi said quietly, not unkindly, but without softening it either. Daehyun turned to Seo-yeon, and Naledi watched something shift in his face, not confusion anymore, but a dawning, horrified understanding as he read the truth in his mother's expression before she'd said a single word. "Mother," he said slowly, "tell me you didn't." "Daehyun, this is not the place. Tell me you didn't try to pay Naledi to leave," he said, louder now, his composed public voice cracking under something raw. Tonight of all nights, 15 minutes before I walked onto that stage. Seo Yeon's jaw tightened, and for a moment Naledi thought she might actually deny it outright, might construct some careful lie even now, in front of live cameras and 400 witnesses. But something in her son's face, genuine devastation, not performance, seemed to strip away whatever calculation she had left. I did it for this family, Seo Yeon said quietly, her voice smaller now than Naledi had heard it all evening. For your future. For everything your father and I built. By paying the woman I love to disappear, Daehyun said, without ever telling me, without ever asking me what I actually want. He shook his head slowly. Do you understand what you've done? Not just to Naledi. To me. To this company. Right now, live, in front of every investor who matters. Yoona Choi, to her credit, had the presence of mind to let the moment breathe rather than interject. Her cameraman quietly adjusting angles to capture both Do-hyun and his mother without losing Naledi from frame, the kind of unscripted, unrepeatable television that made careers. Naledi, Do-hyun said, turning back to her, his expression raw, urgent. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I need you to know that. I believe you, Naledi said quietly. I never thought this was you, Do-hyun. I've always known exactly who your mother thinks I am. She held up the envelope one final time, then extended it towards Seo Yeon. I told you I'd give this back to you in front of everyone, Mrs. Han. I meant it. Seo Yeon stared at the envelope, then at the sea of cameras and phones now recording her every reaction, and reached out, almost mechanically, to take it back. I don't want your money, Naledi said, loud enough now for the room, for the cameras, for every live stream capturing this moment in real time. I never did. I want you to understand something, publicly, since you clearly required a public audience to hear it privately. She looked directly at Seo Yeon, her voice steady, unshaking. I am not a liability to be managed. I am not a problem your family's money can solve. I love your son, and I have built a life and a career worth respecting entirely on my own, without needing anyone's approval to validate it. If that's a scandal to you, Mrs. Han, then I suspect the problem was never me. The ballroom, somehow, had gone even quieter. This is Yoona Choi, reporting live, Yoona said into the camera. Her voice hushed with the particular electricity of a journalist who knows she's just captured something extraordinary, from what may become one of the most significant moments in Han Industries' history. Seo Yeon stood frozen, envelope now back in her own hands, surrounded by 400 witnesses and a live camera feed already being clipped and shared across every major platform in the country. Understanding with sudden, sickening clarity that whatever careful narrative she'd spent decades building around her family's public image had just been irreversibly, permanently rewritten. Dae-hyun reached for Naledi's hand, and she let him take it, the two of them standing together in the center of the ballroom as the room finally, tentatively, began to applaud, not for his speech. Not for the company's next chapter, but for something far more unscripted and far more human than anything the evening had originally promised. Across the room, Naledi caught sight of Chairman Hanwoo Jin, Dae-hyun's father, silent throughout the entire confrontation, watching the scene unfold with an expression she couldn't quite read, his phone already buzzing rapidly in his hand as board members. Investors and PR advisors began reaching out in a rising tide of urgent messages. By morning, this moment would be everywhere. Naledi understood that even as she stood there, Dae-hyun's hand steady around hers. What she didn't yet understand was that Seo Yeon, humiliated in front of the entire financial press of Korea, was not a woman who accepted defeat quietly, and that this ballroom confrontation, as dramatic as it had felt, was only the opening move in a much longer, much more dangerous war for her son's future. The story exploded exactly as Naledi had predicted, and far faster than anyone expected. By 6 a.m., the clip had been viewed 11 million times. By noon, it had crossed international borders, picked up by American entertainment outlets, African news platforms proudly claiming Naledi as one of their own, and Korean gossip accounts dissecting every frame of Seo Yeon's stricken face with brutal, gleeful precision. The hashtag trending across 3 continents translated, roughly to, the envelope heard round the world. Naledi woke that morning in Daehyun's apartment to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand, over and over, an unbroken wave of notifications. "You should probably see this," he said grimly, sitting up, scrolling through headline after headline. Han Industries stock dropped 4% in early trading. The board is calling an emergency session. Naledi sat up slowly, the reality of the previous night settling over her with new weight in the gray morning light. "Because of me. Because of my mother," Daehyun corrected firmly. "You didn't create this crisis, Naledi. You simply refused to let her hide it." His phone buzzed again. This time he frowned at the screen before answering. "It's my father." He stepped into the hallway to take the call. Naledi sat alone in the quiet bedroom, scrolling through her own phone, despite every instinct telling her not to, watching the story metastasize in real time, praise from strangers who called her brave, cruelty from strangers who called her a gold digger, opportunist, attention seeker. Every ugly assumption she'd spent 18 months bracing herself against now arriving all at once, amplified by algorithms that rewarded outrage over nuance. One comment, from an account with a Korean flag in its bio, stopped her cold. She should go back to wherever she came from. Some things aren't meant to mix. Naledi set the phone down, closed her eyes, and reminded herself, deliberately, of every reason she'd walked toward those cameras last night instead of quietly pocketing the money and disappearing. Daehyun returned 15 minutes later, his expression unreadable in a new way that made Naledi's stomach tighten. "What did he say?" she asked. "He wants to see us both. This afternoon. At the house." Daehyun sat down heavily beside her. He didn't say much else. "My father is not a man who reveals his position before he's ready to. And your mother? Hasn't left her room since last night, according to the staff." He exhaled slowly. "Naledi, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay. Do you regret it? Going to the cameras, making this public, instead of coming to me privately first?" Naledi considered the question carefully, unwilling to give him a reflexive, comforting answer he hadn't earned yet. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. But I understand why you might wish I'd done it differently. This wasn't just my life your mother put on public display last night, Daehyun. It was yours too. Your company. Your family's name." She met his eyes steadily. "I made that choice fast, under pressure, and I stand by it. But I also understand if it complicates things for you in ways I didn't fully weigh in that moment." "I'm not upset with you," Daehyun said quickly. Firmly, "I want to be very clear about that. I'm furious with my mother. I'm furious with a system that made you feel like you needed cameras and 11 million strangers to be taken seriously in my own family's eyes." He took her hand. "If anything, I regret that it took something this extreme for anyone in my family to actually listen." They arrived at the Han family estate that afternoon to find Chairman Han Woo-jin waiting in his private study. The same room. Naledi realized where major company decisions had likely been made for 3 generations. He was a tall, silver-haired man with an unreadable, weathered face, exactly the kind of quiet, immovable authority Naledi had expected from the man who'd built an empire before his son ever inherited it. "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. They sat. Seo Yeon was notably absent. "I've spent the morning speaking with the board, our legal team, and our head of public relations," Woo-jin said, his tone giving away nothing. "The stock has stabilized somewhat, though we've lost significant ground with 2 major institutional investors who are, understandably, concerned about the company's internal stability." Father Daehyun began. Woo-jin held up a hand, silencing him without raising his voice. "I'm not finished." He turned his gaze to Naledi, studying her with an intensity that made her sit slightly straighter despite herself. "Miss Blamini, I watched the footage 17 times this morning. I want you to understand that I did not do that out of anger." "Then why?" Naledi asked carefully. "Because in 31 years of running this company," Woo-jin said slowly, I have never once watched someone stand in front of Korea's entire financial press, under that kind of pressure, and speak with that level of composure. Not board members, not executives with decades of media training, not, frankly, my own son in his early years. He paused. My wife tried to buy your silence because she assumed you were a liability. I watched that footage and saw something else entirely. The lady said nothing, uncertain where this was heading, aware of Daehyun beside her, equally still. I am not going to pretend this situation isn't complicated, Woo-jin continued. The board has concerns. Some investors have concerns. There will be difficult conversations in the coming weeks that neither of you will enjoy. He leaned back slightly in his chair. But I did not build this company by surrounding myself with people who fold under pressure, Miss Dlamini. I built it by recognizing strength when I saw it, regardless of where it came from. He looked at his son. Your mother made a grave error in judgment last night. I intend to address that directly, and separately with her. But I did not call this meeting to discuss punishment. Then why did you call it? Daehyun asked. Woo-jin's expression shifted, just slightly, something almost approaching respect settling into his weathered features as he looked back at Naledi. I called it, he said, to ask Miss Dlamini a direct question, and I'd like an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. He folded his hands on the desk. Given everything that happened last night, everything currently unfolding across every major news outlet in this country, do you still want this life? My son. This family. Everything that comes attached to both, including people like my wife, who may never fully accept you? The study went very quiet, Daehyun watching her with unmistakable tension, waiting for her answer along with his father. Naledi thought of the envelope, of Seo Yeon's cold, calculating offer, of 11 million strangers weighing in on a life they knew nothing about, of every sideways glance she'd absorbed for 18 months, every conversation where she'd had to prove, over and over, that she belonged in rooms other people assumed she'd wandered into by mistake. Then she thought of Daehyun's hand finding hers in that ballroom, steady and certain, in front of everyone. Yes, she said finally, her voice clear and unwavering. I still want this life. Not because it's easy, Mr. Han, because it's real, and because I don't quit things simply because they become difficult. She met his gaze directly. But I want to be very clear about something in return. I will not spend the rest of my life proving my worth to people who've already decided I don't have any. If this family wants me in it, that acceptance needs to be real, not a performance for the cameras that happen to be watching this time. Woo-jin studied her for a long, silent moment. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Good, he said simply. Because I have a proposition for both of you, and I suspect it's going to make my wife considerably more furious than she already is. Daehyun leaned forward slightly. What kind of proposition? Woo-jin rose from his desk, moving to the window overlooking the estate's manicured gardens, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture Naledi recognized instantly, the same measured stillness his son fell into during difficult board negotiations. The board convenes in 6 days for the formal CEO transition vote, Woo-jin said. Until last night, that vote was a formality. Daehyun has spent a decade preparing for this role, earning the confidence of every major shareholder individually. But confidence built over a decade can unravel in 24 hours when the public begins questioning the family's judgment, and several board members are now doing exactly that. Because of the scandal, Naledi said quietly. Because of how the scandal was handled, Woo-jin corrected. Or rather, mishandled by my wife, before either of you had any say in it. He turned back to face them. There are 2 paths forward. The board could see this as evidence of instability, a family unable to manage its own affairs, unfit to steer a company through the challenges ahead. Several members, I suspect, are already leaning that direction. And the second path? Daehyun asked. The second path, Woo-jin said, is that this becomes a defining moment instead of a disqualifying one. A story about a company that faced an internal failure of judgment and corrected it, publicly, decisively, rather than concealing it. About a future CEO who chose accountability over image. He looked at Naledi. That story requires you, Miss Blamini, standing beside my son at the board meeting. Publicly, deliberately, not hidden away until the controversy dies down, but present, visible, unmistakably part of this family's next chapter. Naledi felt the weight of what he was asking settle over her. You want me to walk into a room full of board members who watched me hand back a bribe on live television and stand there while they decide whether your son is fit to run this company? Yes, Wu Jin said simply. Because I believe, having watched that footage 17 times, that you walking into that room will do more to convince skeptical board members of this family's strength than any prepared statement my PR team could draft. And if it doesn't work? Naledi asked. If they see me and decide I'm exactly the liability your wife assumed I was? Then we will have lost nothing we weren't already at risk of losing, Wu Jin said. But I don't believe that's what will happen, Miss Blamini. I think you underestimate the effect you had on that room last night, and the effect you're likely to have on this one. Daehyun looked between his father and Naledi, something calculating moving behind his eyes. There's a condition attached to this, isn't there? You wouldn't propose something this significant without one. Wu Jin's expression turned, for the first time, genuinely serious. Yes, if Naledi stands with you at that board meeting, and the vote succeeds, I expect this relationship to be treated with the seriousness it apparently deserves. No more quiet arrangements. No more allowing my wife, or anyone else in this family, to treat Miss Blamini as a temporary complication to be managed, rather than a permanent presence to be respected. He paused. That means, Daehyun, if you intend to marry this woman eventually, as I suspect you do, the engagement should happen properly, and soon, not years from now, once it's convenient. Once the scandal has faded enough that no one remembers wondering whether you were serious about her. The room went silent. Naledi felt her pulse quicken, uncertain whether to feel moved or ambushed by the sudden enormous weight of what was being decided in this study, about her own life, in front of her. Father, Daehyun said slowly, that's not a decision you get to make for either of us. I'm not making it, Wu Jin said. I'm simply pointing out that half measures got us into this crisis. My wife tried to erase Miss Blamini quietly, and it exploded into the largest public scandal this company has faced in a decade. If you intend to keep her in your life, Do-hyun, the family needs to see full commitment, not cautious hedging. Anything less invites exactly the kind of uncertainty that's currently costing us 4% of our stock value. Naledi stood slowly, needing distance from the desk, from both men watching her, from the sudden vertigo of hearing her own future discussed in terms of stock stability and board confidence. I need air, she said quietly, and walked toward the study's French doors leading out to the garden, stepping into the cool afternoon light before either man could respond. She stood alone among manicured hedges and neat rows of chrysanthemums, breathing slowly, trying to separate what she actually wanted from the dizzying momentum of everything happening around her. She heard the door open behind her a few minutes later. Not Do-hyun's footsteps lighter, more hesitant. She turned to find Seo Yeon standing several feet away, still in yesterday's clothes, her usually immaculate appearance visibly diminished. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept at all. I asked the staff where you'd gone, Seo Yeon said quietly. I wanted to speak with you before my husband's proposition makes that impossible to do honestly. Naledi said nothing, waiting. I am not going to apologize, Seo Yeon said, for wanting to protect this family. I still believe I was right to be concerned about how a relationship like yours would be perceived, how it would affect if you came out here to justify what you did, Naledi said evenly. You can save both of us the time. Seo Yeon's jaw tightened. She was quiet for a long moment, something visibly warring behind her composed exterior. I came out here, she said finally, more quietly, because I watched the footage too. 17 times, apparently, same as my husband, though I doubt either of us admitted that to the other. She looked down at her hands. I have spent 4 decades believing that protecting this family meant controlling every variable, eliminating every risk, ensuring nothing and no one could threaten what we built. I have never, not once, considered that the greatest risk to this family's future might be my own unwillingness to see people clearly before deciding what they're worth. That's not an apology, Naledi said quietly. But it's closer to one than I expected. I don't know how to be the woman my husband apparently wants me to become, Seo Yeon said, something genuinely uncertain entering her voice for the first time since Naledi had met her. Overnight, because of one viral video, I don't know how to simply erase 40 years of believing certain things about how this family should protect itself. I'm not asking you to erase anything, Naledi said. I'm asking you to actually look at me, Mrs. Han, not at what you assume I represent, at who I actually am. She held the older woman's gaze steadily. You had an entire evening to ask me a single question about myself before deciding what I was worth in an envelope. You never once did. Seo Yeon absorbed that, something shifting almost imperceptibly in her expression. Your husband wants me at that board meeting, Naledi continued, standing beside your son, in front of everyone who's currently deciding whether this family is stable enough to lead their company forward. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to do it. Why wouldn't you? Seo Yeon asked, genuine surprise coloring her voice. Because I'm tired of being used as a symbol, Naledi said. Last night, I was a liability to be erased. Today, apparently, I'm a strategic asset to be deployed for board confidence. Neither version has asked me what I actually want, Mrs. Han. Not your husband, not you, not even, entirely, your son. Though I believe his heart is in the right place. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Seo Yeon standing alone among the chrysanthemums, and found Do-hyun waiting anxiously near the study doors, his father notably absent, having apparently given them space. What do you want to do? Do-hyun asked quietly. Whatever you decide, Naledi, the board meeting, my father's condition. All of it, I need you to know, I'll support you either way. I'm not going to let this family use you as a tool to fix a crisis they created. Naledi looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the certainty she needed before answering. I want to walk into that board meeting, she said finally. Not because your father asked me to. Because I want to look every single person in that room in the eye and make them understand exactly who they're deciding about. She paused. But Dae-hyun, if we do this, if we do any of this, the engagement your father mentioned can't happen, because a board needs convincing. It has to happen, because it's real, and because it's ours, entirely separate from anyone else's crisis management. Dae-hyun took her hands, his expression fiercely certain. It was always going to be real, Naledi. I've known that for months. I was simply waiting for the right moment, not realizing my mother would force the timeline before I got the chance to choose it myself. 6 days remained until the board meeting. Neither of them yet knew that Seo Yeon, standing alone in that garden, had just made a decision of her own one that would either finally prove her genuine remorse or reveal it as one final, calculated attempt to reclaim control of a situation rapidly spinning beyond her reach. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By 9:15, Naledi stood in the private elevator of Han Industries headquarters beside Dae-hyun, wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit she'd chosen deliberately over anything resembling the emerald gown from the gala, a visual statement, intentional and unmissable, that she belonged in this building as a serious presence, not a romantic footnote. You don't have to do this, Dae-hyun said quietly, watching her check her reflection in the elevator's polished doors. I know, Naledi said. I want to. The doors opened onto the 40th floor boardroom, and the low murmur of conversation among assembled board members died almost instantly as heads turned toward them. 14 board members sat around a long table, along with senior legal counsel and 2 representatives from the company's largest institutional investors, the exact audience, whose confidence would determine whether Dae-hyun's decade of preparation culminated in a CEO title or a very public, very expensive failure. Chairman Han Woo-jin sat at the head of the table. Notably, Seo Yeon was not present. Thank you all for convening this morning, Woo-jin said, rising briefly before gesturing for Dae-hyun and Naledi to take the 2 remaining seats near the front of the room. As you're aware, This board meeting was originally scheduled as a formality, the final confirmation vote for my son's transition to CEO. Given recent events, I understand several of you have concerns you'd like addressed directly before that vote proceeds. A board member near the far end, an older man Naledi recognized from Dae-hyun's earlier briefings as Director Choi. One of the more skeptical, traditionally minded voices on the board spoke first. With respect, Chairman Han, Choi said, the concern isn't personal. It's about stability. In the span of 48 hours, this company's stock dropped 4%. Two institutional investors requested emergency clarification calls, and international media has spent 2 days scrutinizing this family's internal judgment. Whatever the merits of Ms. Dlamini as an individual, he glanced briefly at Naledi. Not unkindly. But with clear caution, the board's responsibility is to this company's stability, not to romantic narratives. I understand the concern, Dae-hyun said, his voice steady despite the weight of the room's attention. But I'd ask the board to consider what actually caused this instability. It wasn't my relationship with Naledi. It was my mother's decision to handle a personal matter through secrecy and financial coercion, rather than transparency. That failure of judgment is what created risk for this company, not the relationship itself. A fair distinction, Choi acknowledged, but one the market may not draw as clearly as you have, Mr. Han. Naledi felt every eye in the room shift toward her, waiting. She rose slowly from her seat, aware of Dae-hyun's tension beside her, aware of Woo Jin watching with careful, unreadable attention from the head of the table. Director Choi, Naledi said, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily across the room. I understand the board's concern is about stability, not about me personally. So let me address that directly, rather than defending myself as though I'm the problem you're actually worried about. She walked slowly toward the center of the room, deliberately unhurried. 2 nights ago, your chairman's wife attempted to pay me to disappear from her son's life. In secret, without his knowledge, 3 floors below a gala meant to showcase this company's leadership to 400 investors. I want you to consider what would have happened if I had simply taken the money and left quietly, as she expected me to. Naledi paused, letting the question settle over the room. This company would have proceeded with the CEO transition exactly as planned. No scandal, no dropped stock, no board meeting like this one. She looked around the table slowly. But you would have confirmed a CEO whose own mother believed the company's stability depended on erasing an inconvenient truth rather than confronting it honestly. That instability wouldn't have disappeared, gentlemen. It simply would have stayed hidden, waiting for a worse moment to surface. The room was silent, several board members exchanging glances. I chose transparency over disappearance, Naledi continued, not because I wanted a scandal, but because I believe a company led by people willing to face difficult truths publicly is fundamentally more stable than one built on carefully managed secrets. You're not voting today on whether Dae-hyun's personal life is convenient for your quarterly projections. You're voting on whether you trust him to lead honestly, even when honesty is uncomfortable. I'd suggest the events of the past 2 days have already answered that question, if you're willing to look at them clearly. Director Choi studied her for a long moment, something in his expression shifting from cautious skepticism towards something more genuinely considering. That's a compelling reframe, Ms. Dlamini, he said slowly. Though I suspect it's easier to make eloquently than to guarantee in practice. Then don't take my word for it, Naledi said. Watch what happens over the next quarter. If this company's leadership continues choosing transparency over concealment, you'll have your answer without needing to trust anyone's promises today. Woo Jin rose from his seat at the head of the table, drawing the room's attention. I'd like to add something, if the board will permit it. He looked around the table slowly. I have led this company for 31 years. In that time, I have made my share of errors in judgment, some of which this board has generously overlooked in service of the company's long-term success. I am asking you to extend my son the same understanding, not because he's earned a pass on accountability, but because how he's chosen to handle this crisis, publicly, honestly, without concealment, demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership this company needs for the next generation. A murmur moved through the room, board members exchanging quiet glances, some nodding slowly. The vote, when it finally came, passed 11-3. Dae-hyun exhaled slowly beside Naledi, the tension of the past 6 days visibly draining from his shoulders. Director Choi, notably, was among the 11 votes in favor, offering Naledi a small, respectful nod as the meeting adjourned. As board members began filing out, Woo Jin approached them both, something almost warm entering his usually unreadable expression. "Congratulations, son," he said simply, then turned to Naledi. "And, thank you, Miss Blamini. I believe you just did more for this company's future than any board presentation I could have prepared." "I didn't do it for the company, Mr. Han," Naledi said honestly. "I did it because I meant every word I said." "I know," Woo Jin said. "That's precisely why it worked." As the boardroom emptied, Dae-hyun's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting into something complicated. "It's my mother," he said slowly. "She wants to see us. Both of us. Tonight," he looked up at Naledi. "She says she has something to show you, something she's been working on since the garden." Naledi felt a flicker of wariness beneath her relief. "Do you know what it is?" "No," Dae-hyun admitted. "But given everything that's happened this week, I think we should find out together." They arrived at the Han estate that evening to find Seo Yeon waiting in the study. Though the room looked different than it had 6 days earlier, softer somehow, the formal chairs rearranged into a smaller, more intimate circle near the fireplace. Seo Yeon rose as they entered, and Naledi noticed immediately that something in her posture had changed. The rigid, controlled elegance was still there, but underneath it sat something more uncertain, almost nervous, an expression Naledi hadn't imagined this woman capable of wearing. "Thank you for coming," Seo Yeon said. "Please, sit." They sat. Seo Yeon remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, visibly gathering herself before continuing. "I spent the past 6 days," she began, "doing something I haven't done in longer than I care to admit. I stopped assuming, and I started asking." She walked to the desk and retrieved a thin folder, holding it for a moment before extending it toward Naledi. "I looked into your work, your career. Not to find leverage this time, Naledi, to actually understand who you are, beyond what I decided you represented the moment I saw you standing beside my son." Naledi took the folder carefully, opening it to find printed articles, research papers, case studies, her own work, meticulously gathered. Her graduate thesis on financial inclusion in underserved South African communities. A profile piece from 3 years ago about her role restructuring microloan systems for women-owned businesses in Johannesburg. A recent presentation she'd given at an international finance summit, one Naledi hadn't even realized had been documented so thoroughly. "You built all of this," Seo Yeon said quietly, "before you ever met my son. You didn't attach yourself to his success, Naledi. You arrived with your own." "I know that, Mrs. Han," Naledi said carefully. "I've always known that. The question was whether you would." "I know that now," Seo Yeon said. "I should have known it the day we met. Instead, I saw a young black woman on my son's arm and decided, before I'd asked you a single genuine question, that I already understood everything I needed to know." Her voice wavered slightly. "That was not a failure of intelligence, Naledi. I am not a stupid woman. It was a failure of character, one I have spent 4 decades never once being forced to confront, because no one ever pushed back hard enough to make me." The room was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not going to pretend this apology erases what I did," Seo Yeon continued. "The board meeting, the stock, the public humiliation you endured because I couldn't be bothered to have an honest conversation instead of a transactional one. Those consequences are mine to sit with, regardless of how this conversation goes tonight." "Then, why show me this?" Naledi asked, gesturing to the folder. "Because I want you to know," Seo Yeon said, "that if you choose to remain in this family, I intend to earn your trust properly, over time, rather than assuming an apology in a study is sufficient. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I'm not certain I would, in your position." She looked at her son, then back at Naledi. But I would like the opportunity to try, if you're willing to let me. Naledi closed the folder slowly, considering the woman standing before her not the cold, calculating figure who'd slid an envelope across a table 6 days ago, but someone genuinely, uncomfortably attempting to reckon with her own failures in real time. I appreciate this, Mrs. Han, Naledi said finally. Genuinely, but I want to be clear about something. I don't need your approval to know my own worth. I've built an entire career and life proving that to myself, long before I met your son, and I'll continue doing so regardless of whether this family ever fully accepts me. She paused. What I do want, if we're going to move forward, is honesty. Not performance. Not strategic reconciliation because a viral video forced your hand. If you're offering genuine effort, I'm willing to meet it. But I won't pretend the last 6 days didn't happen simply to make this easier for everyone. That's fair, Seo Hyun said quietly. More than fair considering Dae Hyun, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. I have something to add, if you'll both allow it. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, and Naledi felt her breath catch even before he opened it. I was going to do this privately, he said, looking at Naledi, somewhere far from cameras, boardrooms, and family drama. But I've realized this week that our life together was never going to be simple. And I don't want to wait for a moment that pretends otherwise. He knelt slowly, the box open between them, a simple, elegant ring catching the firelight. Naledi Dlamini, I don't want to marry you because my father thinks it will stabilize the board's confidence, or because my mother needs a gesture to prove her sincerity. I want to marry you because you walked into a room full of people ready to underestimate you. And you made every single one of them see you clearly instead. I've never loved anyone the way I love you. Will you marry me? Naledi felt tears she hadn't expected gathering. The weight of the past week, the envelope, the cameras, the boardroom, this study, all of it dissolving into something simpler and more certain than anything else that had happened since that cream-colored envelope first slid across a table. Yes, she said softly. Yes, Dae Hyun. He slid the ring onto her finger, rising to pull her into an embrace, and for a moment the study fell away entirely. No board members, no cameras, no calculating mothers-in-law, just the two of them, finally arriving somewhere real. Seo Yeon watched from a few feet away, something complicated moving across her face, grief for the mistake she'd made, perhaps, alongside something that looked unmistakably like the beginning of genuine relief. 6 months later, Naledi stood at the edge of a different room entirely, not a ballroom, not a boardroom, but a small community center in Johannesburg, where she'd returned to launch a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in international finance, funded quietly, deliberately, entirely separate from the Han family name. Dae Hyun stood beside her, and a few feet away, in a role neither of them had expected 6 months earlier, Seo Yoon stood too, having flown in personally to help coordinate the fund's first cohort of recipients, slowly, carefully, earning something she was still learning how to hold. A young reporter approached, recognizing Naledi from the viral footage that had, briefly, defined her entire public identity. Ms. Dlamini, the reporter said, any thoughts on how far you've come since that night at the gala? Naledi looked at Do Hyun, then at Seo Yeon, then out at the room full of young women whose futures this fund would help shape. That night wasn't really about me, Naledi said finally. It was about refusing to let anyone else decide my worth for me. Everything since has just been proof of what happens when you hold that line. If this story left you speechless, drop a comment telling me exactly what you would have said in that boardroom. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from tonight. Subscribe for more stories about women who refuse to be bought, and the love that's strong enough to stand beside them. See you in the next one.